Welcome to LCS Talks. I'm Berkeley Glazer, and I'm the principal of Langley Christian Middle School. And I've got Kevin Merchandani, my co-host, here today. And Kevin is our Director of Instruction for K-12. And we have our therapeutic counselor, Dave McVitie, joining us.
Hello.
And just so you know, we are videotaping this as well. So that'll be on our YouTube channel. And we'll have some live shots appear at various places, I'm sure, in social media.
Hopefully you will have tuned in already to previous episodes where you get a bit of the behind the scenes. We may or may not already have a counter of Berkeley falling asleep.
I'm going to blame Bruce Workland. His voice just takes me out, puts me to sleep.
We'll see.
All
The
right.
test will be today.
Yeah. We are today talking about social emotional development and attachment and joy. Dave is going to engage with us in some stories from his own life. He's going to talk about how we as a school community engage in these conversations. And so, Dave, just to set the stage and frame a bit of our conversation for today, what stories come to mind in terms of joy and attachment, and help our listeners and those tuning in online to get connected with this conversation?
Sure. Well, I got two that come to mind. One super quick one. I am a grandpa, and my grandson, closer. Sorry. My grandson, his name's Brooks. He loved me for a while. He's back to his mom now, but he loved me more than his mom. But there's a point to that. Why? Because every time I would see him, I would light up. And every time he would see me light up, he would light up. And so we would bring this joy to each other, and I'll explain a little more of that later. But the attachment that grew was deep and profound, so much so that he would want me more than his mom, which means something. It says there's some power to what that joy can do to the brain and heart. Mm-hmm. But another story I have is from when I am a father, but when my kids were younger, I would walk with them, I'd be with them, I would always be excited to be with them. And my daughter was... how old would she have been? I think probably around 12. And she was in this stage show. And I had taught my kids from very young. I remember even at Disney World in Florida, we were there, and I would snap my fingers and they would know to look up and find my hand and grab it. So much so that they would not even look anymore. If they heard the snap, they would come, or if they were already there, just lift their hand and they knew where my hand would be. And so she's on stage, and it was Seussical the Musical, and this is just a giant show with tons of color, and I think there was 30-ish kids on the stage at the time, and they were super well trained to only look at the crowd, to never take your eyes off, never stop smiling, always look and engage the crowd. And she was an understudy for on the other cast, she was a different role, and that person was one of the more primary roles. Anyway, that person had gotten sick and started throwing up backstage. So she was not coming on, and there was panic. So I'm in backstage, and I'm on the headphones, and the director is like, "What are we going to do? Oh no, this kid can't come on stage. She's due in 3 minutes," or whatever it was. And then suddenly one of the other backstage people, "Well, where's Leia?" And so they're waving from the side stages, the wings of the stage, right? And they want her to come off stage. Well, she's not going to flinch because she's been trained well. And so she came around and was asking me if I could get Leia's attention. I said, "No problem, I got it." Everybody's singing, everyone's engaged, and I snap my fingers. She, without hesitation, looks at me and sees me wave her off and comes. That went against every rule in the book. Do not look. Do not look to your dad. Don't come off stage. Don't take your eyes off anything. But the attachment that we had created, what she knew that snap to mean, was love. I'm here. I care for you. And I'm happy to be with you. So these are kind of some stories of attachment and the power that attachment can have for kids in the midst of their lives.
Yeah, I love that image of being seen. That idea of play, the idea of joy, being attached to play, that idea of relationship connected to attachment. So those are great ways for us to enter into this conversation. So we're excited to connect with you and hear more of your stories, and then also get a bit of a vision of what this school community could look like as a place that creates joy it builds attachment, builds relationship connections to our students, and then hopefully encourages our families to engage with some of these practices as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're going to continue with this this idea of joy and attachment. And it stems back to, I remember one morning, and every morning Dave comes into my office and says hi and makes a connection. And I so appreciate our time to connect. But this one morning you came in and you went, Berkeley, you have to listen to this podcast. It's going to blow your mind, literally. So share with us. What was the name and what's it
I
about?
think you sent that out to everyone and said,
Did I?
Yeah.
I probably did.
Yeah. It was over my Christmas break.
I'm working
I tuned
hard.
into that one. Yeah.
I wanted to go viral. Anyway, so the book, it's right here. If you're looking on video, I can show you.
There you go.
This is the name of the book and the podcast, The Other Half of Church. And the premise was strange to me. I'd never heard this before, but the idea that the church has only appealed to one half of the brain. And that's the logical, similar to a school, right?
Mm-hmm.
We teach. We want knowledge input into the brain of an individual, but that does not appeal to the other half. And the other half is the relational half that also has all the creative art. So we have music, we have art classes, and we try and do that. Mm-hmm. But as a part of community and connection and attachment and security, the church at least has often missed that boat. So we have worship music, so that's a piece of it, but it doesn't actually accomplish the relational element of what that attachment should be. So he walks through, and there's different elements of it. We're only going to talk about 2 of the 4, I think there are, today, but the first point he made was along the lines of doing, he calls himself a neurotheologian, which is not a real term, but he plays with it. His name is Jim Wilder, and the pastor he partners with is Michael Hendricks to write this book and to do this podcast. But he highlights the science behind joy. Joy being one of the only emotions that you're born with. It's just innately programmed in your brain. And the power of that joy. And so when a baby smiles at a parent, or a parent smiles at a baby and it smiles in return, he describes the activity that's happening in the brain like cardio, like exercise. And the baby can go through the cycle of smiling in return and then still like letting it all go because the brain is exhausted 6 times a minute. And it's this development that happens in the brain, but it's relational. You cannot actually feel joy unless you're in the presence of another person and you see in their face that they're happy to be with you. This is what joy is defined. It's this experience that you have when you know in the eyes and face of an individual that they're delighted, pleased, happy, even excited to be with you. And this is where attachment's rooted. But essentially we start with this joy element and offering our kids. So it's one of the most powerful indicators to long-term mental health is how much joy you have developed in your brain. And that starts as soon as you're able to respond to the face of another person as a baby.
So it's pretty intriguing, Dave, in terms of how our brains work and how they're wired. Maybe there's some defaults and things that we are created to experience in abundance. And we've often talked on our podcast about Jesus's posture and how he engages. But I think for our listeners, what's intriguing to me is that there's this whole neurochemical kind of world taking place in our brains. Maybe if you could unpack a little bit of some of what you know about the science and how that works and give our listeners a bit of a picture of what maybe is going on, maybe, for example, in the teenage brain.
Oh, well, so many things. Mm-hmm. Well, different scientists and psychologists and counselors have done all sorts of research around attachment specifically. Yeah. And found that there's an incredible depth of value in attaching to primarily one person. You can attach to more people, but it's super, super specific, the attachment that happens. So you can't like even replace a hamster with another hamster without noticing a difference. Like you're attached because it means something. And so that security that takes place in the brain determines how well you are, how able you are to stand up against different things, influences, and so on. And so the challenge sometimes with school and teens is they've shifted in their development to attributing a lot of their attachment to peers. And so at that point, depending on how attached they've been to their parents, is where you get all the peer pressure and the sliding, because there's no maintained, but also primarily an initially developed attachment that will have happened. So the more of that there is, the less likely and less prone they are to influence and to peer pressure and those kind of things. So developmentally, you want them to be secure, and you want them to be, hopefully, I think, rooted in your value set and in your relationship with them, so they're not swayed by the wind and whatever influence comes their way. So apart from that, joy is that piece, like we mentioned before, that really, if you develop it, there's different points where the shedding of different neurons happens. 4 is when a lot of the shedding happens, which is why the more language you learn before 4, the more able and the more active you can be in learning and retaining those languages. And then again at 12, there's another shedding of whatever neurons haven't been used, like kind of crossed in your brain. And so we want to develop joy, for example, as much as possible before 4, and then continue to all the way through 12, and don't quit, because neuroplasticity says that our brains constantly respond and can grow, just maybe a little bit more difficult the older you get as those pieces are shed away.
Yeah, the example that comes to my mind when I was in the classroom teaching role back in the day, where laptops were kind of the new phenomenon in classes, and we had them out, and I think we hadn't even come up with cell phone policies. I claimed to have a superpower when I taught middle school, that I could always tell when a student was on task or not just by their eyes. And you'd walk around and go, okay, you're definitely working away at the homework, and you're not. And students would always wonder, how do you know? And it was just that you could see the lighting up of their eyes. You could see what was going on by their level of engagement. And that always, one part of me always went, oh, if I could just have that as part of the learning experience. And that really shaped the way I decided to think about teaching and learning, through engagement of how do I find that spark that's in each child? How do I connect with them? How do I draw those things out of who they are and bring that into the classroom space? And so that became a big part of how I started to think about teaching and learning. How do we find that sense of joy that exists in all kids? That I do think kids are naturally curious. And for me, as a student growing up, when I felt connected to my community and when I felt connected to teachers, it was often through curiosity and wonder and questions. And so some of that, I think, obviously goes back to God putting these things on our hearts and drawing out relationship with Him through questions and conversations. So I guess I'm wondering, Dave, how do we, in practice, notice those things happening in our children's lives? How do we see them, and how do we help them to be known for who they are, and how does that build this sense of attachment as a community?
Well, listening to your first piece, the thing that stood out to me was just the reality that kids in a school setting can learn more effectively if they know they're secure, if they know there's safety and they're known, right? So if they don't have to wonder if the teacher likes them, and if they're anchored in the teacher, which is the primary attachment in the room, then the effect of kids in the room not liking them are less impacting. And so they're able to learn and be more present the more secure they feel. And that's going to be found in attachment, which is then, again, rooted in joy. Does that teacher actually, are they happy that I'm here?
Yeah.
But does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Berkeley, love to hear some examples of that attachment piece and joy and connection, relationship in the middle school. What does that look like?
It was interesting because when we were planning our talking points for this podcast, Kevin, you asked me the question, like, how do I form attachments with the kids so that I can discipline them? As principal, one of my main things that I do is discipline. And so it was actually Dave who pointed out that, oh, you do this well. And I went, what? Yeah. I said, well, Camp Kakwa. And I went, oh, right. Yeah. So in grade 6, when we started middle school, we take the kids away from the building. So for 3 days and 2 nights, we get them out of this environment. We go to Camp Kakwa out by Hope, and we see them in a playful setting, in a setting of exploration and creation. And for me, my whole objective is to learn their names. And I joke with them, but I'm not joking, is that at the beginning I go, okay, before you can leave on the bus to go home, I have to know each and every one of your names. And they all look at me like, oh no, we're never going home. But it's true that in that setting, I learn all of their names, 100 kids every year by the time we're finished. And the reason, the way I'm able to do that is we have our eating groups. So in their cabins, they're in groups of 6 to 8 kids. And I'm able to just chat with them, talk to them. And then at the end we kind of tie in with cleanup as well, so that it's double folded here, that they clean up their areas and then they got to wait for me to dismiss them. And I just have to go around the table and connect their name to who they are. And so doing that for breakfast, lunch, and supper for 3 days works in my brain, so that by the end of the time, I just have them all in the line. They're all mixed up and I can say their names. So that's definitely the way of forming attachment. And then what that allows me to do is then when I have to discipline them or to right the ship, so to speak, then I'm able to do that in a caring, loving environment in which I hope they still feel safe and cared for, because I have that relationship with them.
Yeah, and there's a big stop it sign just right behind the camera where it is right now. We should have positioned that subtly right in our background.
It's
here.
not subtle at all.
No, not at all. And was that a gift from you, Dave?
Yeah.
How did that story take place? How did that happen?
Oh, Berkeley just likes to say stop it sometimes.
Lots.
No explanation. Just
Yeah.
stop.
Stop it.
Yeah,
It's
Stop
just
it.
easier, but
that's awesome.
it's a little bit of a joke.
Yeah, totally.
But
And
it's
then,
not.
You bring it out.
Yeah.
How often does the
So he made
riot
this
shield
big.
come out?
It's my super shield, my superpower. So it's actually a shield I can put on my arm, and I've actually incorporated into talks to the kids. So when we have to have an assembly and talk to them about bad behaviors, I bring it out, and they all know that this is the stop it talk.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. What I think it says is that you can have a kind of connection relationship to a student where you are a part of and inviting them into a set of boundaries and clear structures and guidelines. That there's a sense of ownership that needs to take place in order for others to belong as well too. And you've got a really important role, both of you, in terms of restoration of righting relationships and bringing students back to understanding, of awareness of different emotions that have come up. Often it's probably your lunch hours that kids have to work things out, and then they're in here connecting with you and restoring those relationships. So walk me through what that might look like. How do you have those conversations from a place of that foundation of relationship? How do you work towards restoration of maybe hurt relationships?
Well, just before I get to that, what I love about what Berkeley does is this in the beginning of their experience with him, right? A little bit like babies. We create that connection and joy and that attachment before we need to discipline, because he doesn't know them. There's nothing going wrong yet. And so there's this like, I am actually pleased to be with you, so much so that I know your name, so much that I know characteristics about you by watching you in these 3 days. So that foundation that's developed is super powerful for him, but also for other teachers, other staff. If we have a similar motto or approach to, am I connected with this kid first, even in the midst of a specific scenario? How are you? What's going on for you? What's going on with your heart? Is there something that you are carrying today that I don't know about yet? Is often an important way just to connect first. I care about you before the behavior. And reminding them, I know you. Berkeley will use their name. I'm stealing his words. He could say that himself. But reminding them that you know them, that you have a history with them, reminding them of something that you know about them or some experience you've had with them. So I coach the kids in grade 7 right now, basketball. Hey, awesome shot. Or, you've improved so much on your defense on the court or whatever. It allows me to engage with them in a neutral way. Oh, right. You know me a little bit and we're okay. And that softens and reminds them that they're okay before we move toward correction.
Plus, Dave, if you've been in Dave's office, it's like full of Star Wars stuff and stuffies, and kids just love going in there just to decompress and just to re-regulate and just play with the all stuffed animals that he's got in there. It's pretty cool.
Fidgets and
Yeah.
and lighting and environment makes a difference too. I don't do I don't do any discipline, but I do guidance and awareness and kind of correction stuff. So it helps me to be able to say, I am not the trouble guy. Like, I'm not going to get you in trouble here. That also can sometimes diffuse some extra fear or whatever concern they may have. But it's different depending on who they are, though. We've got to take them as individuals in the midst.
Yeah.
So, Dave, you've walked us through your emotion facilitated coaching approach a number of times. I think it's been super helpful in our conversations about gender and sexuality, being a place of belonging, being a Christian school community committed to the growth and formation of our students. Can you walk us through maybe an example of a student comes to you and says, hey, I want to chat, and what does that look like from that emotion facilitated approach to help them to be restored? And obviously that may not take place right away, but how does that, out of that place of attachment, start to grow in terms of relationship, of connection, of helping the student go through that journey of making sense of their experiences?
Well, that is one of the important ways that I do navigate and help them know that they're known. I had a student in my office yesterday, physical confrontation situation. And so one of the ways to let him know that I know him is to validate, right? Okay, so you punched the kid in the face. All right, tell me about that. So I need a little bit of the story first. Okay, it makes sense that you would want to punch him in the face because he did this and it frustrated you like this, and that would build up a lot. And I don't blame you for having that sudden crazy urge just to lash out. Oh yeah, you get it. Okay, I don't have to wonder if you understand. That I'm not giving him permission, saying you absolutely should have punched him in the face. But it allows that I'm known. And so if he has to move toward correction, at least he gets where it came from. And then they can receive it differently. There's a different piece of their heart that receives it rather than he doesn't get it, so I'm just not going to listen. I'll say yes even though I don't mean it. Like it makes it really hard for them to actually hold on to that posture of defiance when you reach down into the intention and the heart and the validating.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's talk about another aspect of creating joy and experiencing joy within a community, in our community, and the whole idea of serving. And how can that fit into creating joy?
Well, serving, man, I don't remember what we talked about on this one, but I'm going to wing it.
Go for it.
So serving is a powerful thing because we want to offer ourselves to another, right? And so it's really hard to serve somebody in a way that means something if you don't know them. You can do things externally. I don't know how many times I've heard stories of people on short-term mission trips and they're doing things. Yeah. Great, you put up a house in Mexico or you whatever, but did you impact the person? Well, you met a physical need, but have you served their heart? Do you know them so that they can receive it as not just a check mark and then oftentimes it just becomes entitlement. Well, they're building houses. When do I get mine? Yeah. Right? In that kind of way. So serving, if you know the heart of a person, then you know why and what you're actually offering them, which is hopefully more than just action, but care for who they are and the heart of who they are. Yeah. And so the joy of being known and letting them know you're happy to be with them and happy to serve them and offer whatever it is you can, creates an opportunity for that attachment to know that this person knows me well enough I can trust them and I can open up my heart and actually admit what I need, even if it's in the thank you. Yeah. This really meant a lot. So that's my initial response to your question. Serving through the lens of joy and attachment.
Yeah, we said we'd come back to Jesus and talk about him and how he notices people in the Gospels. And so, Dave, I want to come back to this question of how our community can continue to grow in joy and experience that abundant life. We often talk about John 10:10, that abundant life, that full life in Jesus. And the example that always comes to my mind is just how much love there is when Jesus shows up with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and just as I think of how he wades into the depth of her life, knows her, speaks very clear truth about what is going on in her life, and that idea of her response, her service-oriented response, is to take that back to the community. There would have to be a sense of deep joy and awareness of herself, that this identity forming piece of who she is took place through that relationship of attachment, and what seems to be a rather short conversation of Jesus posing questions and responding to her, and she asking and sharing a little bit. But I always think of that moment of Jesus's deep empathy for her and for her community that he obviously had a picture of in terms of what her response would be too. So how does a community respond to the love, the grace-filled attachment of Jesus, and how does it then in response experience joy?
Oh man, I love those stories. Absolutely. She was ready to serve him. Why? Because she was known and he knew her and she didn't have to hide and there was no shame, which means what? He was pleased to be with her. Yeah. Zacchaeus, same thing. He saw me. Come to my house, I'll feed you. I'll leave everything because I'm known and I don't have to be ashamed. The way that Jesus would talk to let the little children come to me because I know them and I want them to know how happy I am to be with them. The expression of joy and all through the Old Testament, the references to being in the presence of God is also referencing that. So we need to experience this piece of joy ourselves in Christ before we can really expand it out to others, right? Which is hard because we physically can't see God anymore unless through a dream or impact. But I was with a client yesterday and talking with them through this concept, and the words we use in Christianese aren't so great, right? Like we use a lot of voice, hear, see, experience, whatever. Yeah. A lot of words that are not literally applicable, right? So it's okay, well, when's the last time that you knew in your heart that God was communicating with you? So I got rid of all the whatever trigger words. He went back and remembered a moment, and he was like, oh, he was telling me something. And in that moment, he knew God was pleased to be with him. And he could remember the joy that he felt. So the response that we have to Jesus is found in our experiences with him. We don't want to get too stuck on specific words, but recognize that all through the Old Testament, joy in the face of God. We have a lot of words like presence and countenance, but most of them should be translated as face, because when you look to the face, different chunks of your brain light up, and exercise and resilience is built and health is built. And then you want to respond because of the attachment that's created as a result. That was the first part of your question. I feel like I missed the second part. What was the second part?
The second part is, how does this community of LCS experience that joy and that abundant life? What would that look like?
Well, first, seek it out with God. So you should listen to the podcast or whatever. The book is a little bit harder to wrap your mind around than I realized, because I'm a counselor and all of it was speaking my language, but often it's not quite that way for others listening. But the pursuit of remembering the moments where you knew God was speaking, sharing, is pleased with you, happy to be with you. Yeah. So how do we do that here? Well, first of all, we need to offer that to each other. So you start by experiencing it, hopefully. But it's so easy to get wrapped up in the task. Okay, whatever. Someone comes into my office. 2 years ago, I had this thought, man, if I want to be known for one phrase, what is it? This was before I read the book. Just for saying, I'm so glad you're here. Right? But I can say that and look down at my computer. It means nothing. But if I'm looking in your eyes and you see the look in my face that I'm sincerely glad you're here, it changes everything. So we need to slow down, and we need, as teachers and as staff in a school, to let students know that we are honestly glad they're here. They might be hard. They might be easy. They might be so easy you forget to notice, or so difficult that sometimes you're not so glad they're here. But there is a part of you that you can tap into that will express how glad you are to be with them. Shake their hand, smile, use their name. Whatever opportunity you have to create that experience of joy so their brain lights up and knows that they're known, and then knows that they're safe. And so that's the foundation of what it means to be joyfully attached in a school setting, creating a flourishing opportunity to learn.
Let's bring our parents into the conversation. And you and your wife, Melissa, actually do parent training workshops. And I think we have one scheduled, don't we, for our community?
We do and did, but we're postponing it till after spring break because of a different event that we have on the same day that we'd initially planned. So.
All right, no worries. So back to the conversation. So how does a parent develop deep attachments with their kids? Can you give some guidance there?
Sure. Similarly to here, how do I develop deep attachments with my kids? And some are easier than others. In my own house, it's easier to smile at one kid who is whatever, smiling back at you right away, right? Like, so if I smile at him, he knows that I'm happy and I show him I'm pleased. He lights up like my grandson, right? And then when he lights up with joy, then I know he's happy to be with me and I feel joy. So it's this play back and forth. But again, just like in a school setting, it's way too easy to get into the whatever. What's next? Oh, I need to be making dinner, doing the dishes. Where's your homework? Task oriented. So we actually really, really need to make space in our homes to allow our kids to know our delight to be with them in our face. Like, they have to see your face. So you have to be able to make space for yourself, to shed some of the anxieties and stresses, or to put them on the shelf, whatever that might look like, and to intentionally be present. So even if it means when your child walks through that door, or into the car, or gets off the bus, whatever it is, stopping long enough. And maybe like in the old days, I did this. I would come home, my mom would have cookies out or whatever she would have, right? And you'd sit at the table. And there was this moment where you just knew she was happy to be with you. And she'd prepare it, right? We don't have that as much anymore. Where are we going next? Basketball, club volleyball. I don't know, picking up this sibling from daycare. There's so many things that there's no moment to slow down and just see the light in your mom's eyes to know that she's happy to be with you. So whatever that looks like for you, to embrace it and to be intentional, to know that it's worth it. You don't need to always be doing tasks. In fact, you probably shouldn't always be doing something. So that might mean, things like board games instead of movies or video games. It might be, but again, if you're just tense and frustrated all the time, when is this going to be over? They'll feel it. So you've got to find a balance of doing that. And so one of my kids doesn't want anything to do with that. So I have to find different moments to have joy with him. To show him that I'm happy to be with him, and to actually participate in things that he loves to do, and to enjoy his joy, his happiness. He'll see that. He'll feel it in my presence, in my countenance, in my response to his interests. Just slowing down, showing him happiness.
As you're talking about that, just flooding back memories. In the Glazer household, Monopoly is definitely banned. Monopoly just turns into a fist fight, drag him out, knock him down activity. So that, you gotta watch what game it is.
Wrong board game.
That's right. I won't go into any stories. Bringing back happy memories already.
Okay, maybe board games are the wrong answer.
No, there are board games. Board games are just choose the right one.
But you're sitting around a table, right? And we don't eat together very often anymore. All of the elements of face-to-face contact that we used to have. Tell me about your day, highs and lows. You see happiness, and that creates this joy experience, right? Like, what do I appreciate about you? Oh, I appreciate this and this and this about you, and they see that you appreciate it. You've created joy and a response inside of them. And so there's different little things that you can do, but you do have to be intentional about them.
Yeah. I love where you have taken us in terms of the conversation here, Dave, and what comes to my mind is, and I'll maybe throw in a plug to our listeners to tune into season 2, where we talked about faith, identity, and technology. And there we had conversations about the cell phone, which I think often ends up being the distraction piece. And the other day, I think I was on my phone. My phone, since that podcast season, I've been shutting it off at a certain time. It turns off. I can't use my apps. Can't check my email. Go back on there. Early morning, it tunes back on. this was one of those moments where I'm sitting at the couch, and I know we're a couple minutes over. The phone is already turned off. I'm still answering an email, and my son comes up to me and he says, "Dad, I got to show you this." And honestly, the podcast, I think it was either Dave or Eric talking, went, "Drop your phone." And I remember dropping my phone and going, "All right, Merrick, show me what you have there." And I remember just that moment of joy that I got to experience as well, too.
Yeah.
What did I miss out on my phone? Well, I think I probably forgot what I was working on or something like that, but I engaged in a beautiful moment of connection with my child. And that's what we want to see with our listeners and our school community here, where we may have to drop some of those things. I certainly think Jesus did, right? He came down from heaven. He gave up his kingdom to bring the kingdom here and to rebuild and restore our relationship. And that's hopefully an image of what we want to be as a school community, a community committed to the kingdom of God and being a place where his joy is experienced. So Dave, this has been awesome.
And speaking of that, I just picture too, like, how many times do your kids look at your face? Especially when they're showing you something on their phone. They want to see you smile or laugh.
Yeah.
They want to see that you get them. They want to see that joy in your face. Swimming lessons.
Yeah.
They've counted, I can't remember how many times, if you're sitting watching your kid at swimming lessons, how many times a minute they look at you to see if you're watching.
Yeah.
Don't have your phone in your hand. Don't do it unless it's 2 pictures and then put in your pocket.
Yeah.
But all of that is the pursuit of, are you pleased with me? Look at me, Dad. Look at me, Mom. All of that is the pursuit of developing that resilience, that mental health, and that strength of joy and attachment that they desperately need. And we are often starving them of because of our lifestyles or our phones. So be present. Drop it.
Drop it.
Look at your kid's face.
That's going to be your saying now. Drop it.
That'll be
Yeah.
mine. Yeah.
I'm
Instead of
stopping.
Kevin's got
You're
one.
drop it.
Oh, Davey, you've got another one.
We'll figure it out later.
Yeah, there
We'll
we
figure
go.
that one out.
Feel it? I don't know.
No.
All right. Any last words, gentlemen, before we close the show?
No, this is great. It was awesome to see you stay awake for a whole podcast episode, Berkeley.
No.
Oh, shots fired. It's true.
This is true. That's the first time I ever noticed it. Our producers looking at us going, hey,
Yeah.
we don't want you back.
Our thanks to our producer, Dylan Bandara. Thank you so much. He just sits quietly in the corner just laughing at us, telling us what to do, what not to do. So appreciate you making this work. For our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in again. And remember that we want to hear what you think, so you can email us at podcast@langleychristian.com. Thanks for listening.